I'm going to start with Ms. Gaines. You had participated in a small group that I was with earlier, and I learned something kind of out of this. This whole thing is kind of based on the idea that, you know, people are one way or the other. As I understand it, is it true that if people go all the way in transgender, that that they still have to take hormones? That they really, you know, like if a boy becomes a gal, he still has to. He doesn't become a gal all the way. He still has to take hormones to deal with this.
So different governing bodies of different sports have different rules. So for example, FINA, which is the international governing body of swimming, now has implemented a rule that says if you've gone through male puberty, you cannot compete with women. But then you have other sports, such as soccer, that says you can have, it's a testosterone threshold. So I believe now it's 10 nanomoles per liter of testosterone any person, male, female, can possess and still be allowed to play on the women's team. So it varies by sport, but specifically the NCAA, they had a blanket policy in 2010 that just said 12 months of HRT, which of course is hormone replacement therapy.
One thing I always wonder about this, and I'll ask Ms. Perry, and if you don't have an answer, that's okay. As I understand it from what I've read, the vast majority of people, 80 to 95%, who go what they call discordant gender identity, eventually come back to their original gender. And I sometimes wonder, as we normalize this idea of guys playing in women's sports, are you kind of creating a situation which would be tragic if it's true, that some of these guys are now never going to switch back because their whole social setting is praising them for switching? And I think it would be just kind of too bad if they would have been the 80 or 95% had snapped back, but because of this, they won't. Do you think that's a concern, Ms. Perry?
I think absolutely it's a concern. In fact, studies show that 75 to 90% of children, if they are allowed to progress through 75 to 90% of children, if allowed to progress through normal puberty, eventually make peace with their natal biological sex and avoid the trans dilemma altogether. We also know, based on studies, that social transitioning, including playing on a team specifically articulated by the Biden administration in its notice of proposed rulemaking, playing on the team that you want specifically for your gender identity, not based on sex, is an entree into ultimate medical transitioning. Now, with the rise of detransitioners, which we've seen in widespread formats, including out in California, where Kaiser Permanente is subject to multiple lawsuits for fast-tracking gender identitarian surgeries, the mind reels at what the implications are going to be.
I did read that these people are 19 times more likely than the rest of the public commit suicide. You mean by encouraging these kids to play on an athletic team that doesn't match their actual sex, you may be sending them down this path in which they might wind up killing themselves?
Absolutely. In addition to using cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers, that actually sets off many latent mental health conditions that may not have been previously diagnosed. A full 30% in America of young women who are presenting to a gender confirmation clinic have not been diagnosed, but are ultimately diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. As the mother of 2 children on the autism spectrum disorder scale, I will tell you right now, they are very, very obvious manifestations that someone not trained to look for would have to take into account rather than fast-tracking someone into medical and hormonal castration.
Well, this is really interesting. I mean, I would say it's one thing if you're dealing with 30 or 35-year-olds, but we're here largely dealing with people who are so young, you know, 14, 15 years old, and you're kind of pushing them towards transitioning and maybe screwing up their whole life. Is that true?
No question.